blew my goddamn mind. Like it was like everything that every question mark that I had in my mind about scuba that I could never get a real answer from anybody. It, there was a logical discussion to be had with avenues of thought and ways of thinking that really turned me into who I am today.
Off Gassing, a scuba podcast with host Nick Hogel. On this week's episode, I interviewed James Mott, a Michigan native and unified team diving instructor. As many of you know, James co-hosts the Great Dive podcast, one of the most successful scuba diving podcasts. We discuss his journey as a diver, the massive scale of the Great Lakes, ice diving, and of course, I get advice on scuba podcasting. Enjoy. James, how are you doing this evening?
I am doing very good. Thank you very much for having me, Nick.
Yeah, man. This is amazing to have you on. Obviously, I'm a little nervous because you've had a pretty good podcast going for a while. So, I guess we'll. Usually, I start with the diving history, but since I brought the podcast up, do you want to talk a little bit about how that got started and why you wanted to go into it?
Yeah, I'd love to. That's actually a fun one because, the guy I run the podcast with, my good buddy Brando, he and I have been local Great Lakes diving buddies for decades. We would go to the pub after a day of diving, or on the way home, from a Great Lakes charter. Usually everybody would stop off and grab some food or something after getting off the boat and having a beer and a burger or whatever, and the stories would flow. And when we would do just regular weekday dives, we'd usually have video cameras going, and we'd all just pop up to the local pub and plug our camera into their TV and shut off the baseball game and watch dive videos and just talk and laugh and tell stupid stories and crack jokes. And one day I just had gotten into listening to a few podcasts, and I was like, hey, you wanna try making a podcast? And he was like, what the hell is that? And we tried to screw it around with it a little bit, and made our first episode. Had no goddamn idea what we were doing, and just learned on the fly. And here we are, over 300 episodes later. The show, it's crazy, man. The show keeps growing and growing and growing every year, and it's pretty awesome.
Yeah, no, that's amazing because it's definitely something for a small podcast like myself just to strive for, because I want to say it's probably not even probably it's the biggest scuba podcast out there. So congratulations on that, because usually whenever when I first started getting into the thinking about doing a podcast, it was like, okay, well, what other ones are out there? And you usually are like the first one that pops up. So that's awesome.
No, I was just gonna say it's surprising to me too. I mean, it's I never thought we'd catch on like we do. It's but I think we're just two genuine scuba dudes that are just two regular old guys that love diving and want to make diving better for the community overall. And it's people are liking what we say for the most part, I guess.
That is not a bad thing. Not a bad thing. So I was just reading through your story on your website, and I love it, dude. It's such a great story. You're coming across exactly on what you want to do, and you talk a little bit about growing up on the Great Lakes, visiting your grandparents' cottage. Is that, I'm assuming, when you first started to scuba dive? Do you want to talk a little bit about your scuba history?
Yeah, my very first underwater breath was in one of those little, like, 3-4 foot diameter blue plastic kiddie little swimming pools. It's like 1.5 feet deep, and my uncle had a tank and a regulator that he just dropped into this pool, and I laid in that pool in the middle of the backyard at some little family function for like 2 hours, like no mask, nothing, just like a regulator. Like I was in another world, like I was on some giant coral reef somewhere, like in my head, like just exploring the world. And I was like, I don't know, like 8 years old maybe or something like that. And then when I turned 15, I talked my cousin into taking a class with me, and I basically babysat for like a whole summer to earn enough money to take my scuba class and get my mask fins and snorkel, and just fell in love with it. Like a year later, started working after schools at the little local dive shop, and 30 years later, here I am, doing cleaning toilets and hanging up stinky feet in wetsuits, still doing the same thing 30 years later.
Are you still at the same dive shop?
Yeah, it's changed owners over the years, but it's yeah, it's still a lot of the same community, same people. It's just what I am, who I am, what I do. It's just that dive guy. Just I'm a tank monkey at heart, I guess.
No, that's awesome. So how did you venture into the technical world?
Well, my very first go at it was in the mid to late '90s, and it didn't go really well. I really got the living shit scared out of me. There was like a Russian roulette of scuba training, back then, and it was just do whatever the hell you want and wear whatever the hell you want. And I took a couple classes, and it wasn't for me at all. And I hung it up then, thinking, I'm just going to be a recreational diver. Then, I came into my buddy Brando, who turned me on to DIR, and it blew my goddamn mind. Like it was like everything that every question mark that I had in my mind about scuba that I could never get a real answer from anybody. There was a logical discussion to be had with avenues of thought and ways of thinking that really turned me into who I am today.
Awesome, awesome. Were you an instructor or I should say a dive professional at this point, or were you just moving through the ranks and then found DIR, or what level of diving were you at when you found it?
I was an instructor. I was a PADI instructor. I became a PADI instructor in '98. It was just teaching through the shop. It was a little bit different because the guys that when I was just the young whippersnapper, little wet behind the ears kid, all the guys that were teaching there were in their like early 50s. And here I am, a little 20-year-old little shit, comes out of instructor school, like, I'm going to change the world kind of thing. And I had a good control of buoyancy, in the day, even as a young kid. Like I just thought I saw that as something that was important. And one of like the head instructors, I remember him telling me that you can't teach people neutral buoyancy. That it's something that has to come through, over time. And I took that as a challenge, as a very young kid, young instructor, to prove him wrong, that I could take one of his students and teach him buoyancy the next weekend, and just really get at him. So, and that was one of the other things, when I learned, of DIR, that it was such a foundational skill and a building block to what a diver should be. That's why it fell right in line with my way of thinking anyways.
Okay, that's awesome. And that's, to bring it back just a little bit, that's how you said you met your buddy, your co-host. Did you both just show up to a class together, or how did that all unfold?
No. See, he had been coming into the dive. He was an independent instructor that would come into the dive shop I was working at, from time to time. And he was doing the same thing. Like he was chasing something. And I didn't know this at the time, but he was chasing something too. Like there was always something missing. Taking this class and taking the next class and taking the next class, and every class there was everything that you bought previously you got to get rid of, and because we do it this way now, and then you take the next class and yeah, we don't do it like that anymore. You got to change it and get all new gear for doing it this way. And there was just never a clear explanation. So he came to DIR first. He came across, it was the birth of the internet, and he was one of those early internet guys, and came across a lot of those chat boards and learned about the fundamentals of DIR, and a guy named Andrew Georgitsis that was teaching that, and he fell in line with him and started teaching. And we would start seeing each other at the shop, and he talked me into just diving with him, and it's exactly what I needed to see.
So when you started going down the DIR route, was it I want to teach this, or was it I'm just going to be a student of this for a while? Like when did you make the transition into teaching this sort of, or this configuration, this style of diving?
Well, like immediately I started changing the way I presented scuba. Like the second I saw it, and then like when I first went through that, very early fundamentals of DIR, which is what it was called at the time, it blew my mind. And I immediately started integrating the way I taught classes and wanted to produce a better student immediately. Immediately, I went to teaching as much as I could neutrally buoyant, even though I didn't even know how to like really do a whole entire class neutrally buoyant yet. I was on it, and then slowly started taking more classes at the time, through GUE, and then Andrew had left as the training director for GUE, and I had taken I revisited technical with him because I wanted to learn ratio deco. So I went out to visit him, and then when he started UTD, I got a call, and he said, "Hey, I'm doing the first instructor core of this new agency," and I got invited to be part of it. That was 2009, so I'd already been teaching for like 10 years through as a PADI instructor, and picked this up as well.
I'm just a PADI instructor, recreational, and I'm trying to move into. I was teaching through a shop in Texas, and out here where I live, the diving is not really. There is no diving where I live. I mean, if you're brave enough, which hopefully I can find a group of people that will go out with me. But it's just low vis, and especially in the area where I'm at, it's. You're an hour flight away from some of the best, beautiful diving in the world. So most people are like, why would I go here when we can hop on a flight and go somewhere? So I'm looking into getting back into teaching, and I'm pushing independent so I can teach courses, neutrally buoyant, kind of go in that direction. And I really enjoy what I've seen from. I don't know the exact class, but or maybe you start all students this way, where you put them in a pool, long hose supplied, and they just find their buoyancy before they even have any gear and know their weight. Is that a pretty correct assessment on how that's conducted?
Well, that's how I teach a beginner today. That's the beginning of our, the UTD scuba diving approach to learning diving. Is the very first thing they need to learn is to be underwater. And to be underwater, you can't be a terrestrial human who, walks perpendicular to the bottom, that has a head looking 90 degrees to their spine. You have to learn the mechanics and the attributes of being underwater. So we do that first. To be comfortable with water on your face, to be comfortable in a flat horizontal position, to understand that neutral buoyancy, flat and in control, And in trim is the crawling of scuba diving. And once you learn that, we start adding all the other skills, like put a mask on so you can see, and take your regulator out of your mouth and put it back in again. And so then everything gets built on the base of neutral buoyancy so that you never have this need or this urge or this subconscious need to fall back to your knees and fall back to the ground for stability. Your stability is in your breathing. And if you've got control of your breathing, you've got control of yourself in the water. And then for a lot of people that are already certified that aren't ready to take that full big, DIR buy-in, which is what really keeps it away from most of the people out there, because it's a real holistic system and approach. It's the training goes hand in hand with the equipment, and the equipment goes hand in hand with the diving, and the diving goes hand in hand with the people you dive with, and it all kind of works together. So it's a big buy-in to really go DIR, which keeps a lot of people away from it. So we developed a couple of years ago that ESM that you're talking about, the Extreme Scuba Makeover, which is really, it just takes anybody in any gear, any configuration. You just got to have a long hose, hanging from your gear so you can, float your BC on the surface and learn neutral buoyancy below it, because we're in mid water, learning balance, learning trim, learning, some basic propulsion techniques so you can stay in one position and not have to constantly, perpetually swim forward the whole time. And it's a great way to bring people into just good diving habits without that whole big, you got to be in a backplate and wing and a long hose and a dry suit with pockets, and you don't have to have that whole big buy-in.
Yeah, no, I think that's absolutely amazing. Just because I really like that approach, and that's something that I feel I want to incorporate in my teaching. Just because you're really starting from the base, which I think is a great idea. So I'm assuming that anybody from any agency can come over and take an extreme makeover, extreme scuba makeover. What are some of and I know you've just explained some of them, but what are some of the challenges? Like, what's the most challenging thing? Just basically getting people away from the gravitating back towards their knees. It's just like, what are some of the challenges that you face going through a course like that?
Well, the challenges are you have set yourself up for a difficult road when your original training has been negatively buoyant on your knees. Because when you look at the Thorndike laws of learning, that law of primacy says that when something goes wrong, you will generally resort back to the way you originally learned how to do something. And this is why, when you've got the diver that uncomfortable, but they're down in Cozumel, so the dive master is gonna take them on the Devil's Throat dive, because that's they're gonna get the biggest tips if they take them on the Devil's Throat. If they don't do that one, everybody's gonna be pissed off. So everybody gets to go, and when somebody gets kicked in the face swimming out of that little swim through in 140 feet of water, and they have to clear a mask or put a mask back on, it lends itself to breaking trim, trying to find buoyancy, trying to find a state of buoyancy that you're comfortable with, which is negative on your knees, head up. But that's like another 600 feet below you is the problem, in an environment like that. So getting people to leave that need of needing to be what I call terrestrial, like a human being standing upright with their face looking perpendicular to the way their body moves, that doesn't translate into what a diver needs to be like. And for decades, the scuba industry has taught people, human beings, to just throw a bunch of scuba gear on and let the scuba gear do it for them. And it hasn't really taught anybody how to really be a diver. And diver is, there's a look to a diver. There's a a pretty look to a diver. There's a magic to a diver. There's a body mechanic. There's a mindset to a diver that goes well beyond just the equipment. That's what you have to fix. That's the hard part.
Dude, I love that. I love the way that you explain how a diver should be, and unfortunately, I do see that in the industry a lot. I mean, I have not been in the industry very long. I've been a dive pro for a little over 2 years. Been scuba diving, I think, since like 2016, and early on, you hear this a lot, and it rings true. You don't know what you don't know, and it took me a while kind of to find that DIR path. Yeah, so and oddly enough, before I even really knew, I'm just kind of piecing together stuff. And the only, so I'm big on travel. That's kind of been the I don't want to say foundation of my scuba diving, but I'm always like, okay, what's that next destination? I want to be on that boat in the middle of nowhere. And the first BCD I had was just this big bulky jacket BCD, and I used the shit out of it. I'm happy that I got it. It brought me a long way, but when I went to traveling, I'm like, man, this sucks. Like, this is taking up all of my luggage. So I was like, okay, like, how can I streamline this? And that's actually how I gravitated towards a backplate and wing, just to find out like, oh, okay, this is like a natural progression. I feel like for a lot of divers looking to go further, and that's kind of when I slowly started finding like, oh, there's this whole other method of diving that I really wasn't taught, and I don't regret anything that I was taught. It's all a big learning point. Once again, you don't know what you don't know, and I was enjoying the whole ride. So, but I remember when I took my first, I guess, DIR class. It was an intro to tech, and I thought, from my reading and all this stuff, I had all the good gear, and then I walk into the classroom, and the instructor's like, okay, we need to get rid of this, we need to get rid of that, you need to change this, you need to change that. And I'm like, man, do I even know how to scuba dive? So.
Well, yeah. I mean, it can be humbling, but you can't confuse, DAR, and it's almost like it's almost illegal to say those letters, anymore in 2023 here. But there's recreational diving, there's technical diving, there's cave diving, and all of them have multitudes of different ways to approach the game, which it really is just like how you want to think through this game, and have a winning mindset, for the whole big picture. And to me, that's what DIR was. It rang, it made sense from the sports I'd done in the past, from the martial arts I'd done in the past. It wasn't just the equipment, and that's one thing I would tell you. It's not just getting the backplate that makes it. It's not just having the long hose and a set of jet fins that makes it. There's more to it than that, and that's the mindset thing. Just it's a way of thinking that is different, that really rang true to me.
So tell me about what's a day diving in the Great Lakes? What's a good fun what's your ideal day of diving? Talk about that a little bit. I've never been, so I'm curious.
I'm glad you mentioned this, Nick, because you're just talking about the place where you live, and it's shitty visibility, and nobody wants to dive there, and you got it's an hour plane ride to do anything fun and cool. But I'll tell you, when you go through some training, like we were just talking about, it brings a whole new appreciation to getting in the water. And now, like, I can get in the water with somebody that I enjoy diving with, and it can be 5 feet of visibility, and we can make it a killer dive, because we're not getting lost, we're not getting separated. You have an awareness of each other, you have an awareness of the environment, that you don't let that happen. As wonderful it is to have those beautiful, great wonderful conditions, it makes you a little bit lazy, because you don't have to constantly check in on a buddy because they're always in sight. So I would tell you to dive in that little local spot. And if you can get really good in that bad viz, shitty water, not much to see, and get really, really good with teammates in the water there, it is only going to get amplified and make those fun dives way more fun. Now, that's the local inland diving that we do in Michigan. We've got a bunch of inland lakes that would be your typical what you would think of as a lake dive here in Michigan. It's a muddy, marly, silty bottom full of decayed leaves and fish poop, for centuries, and it's bad viz, and it's a soft, silty bottom, and if you kick it up, you go from the good 6 feet of visibility to 0 feet of visibility really quickly. But what really makes what we do is out in the Great Lakes, which for your listeners around the world, the Great Lakes are like inland freshwater seas. I mean, it's almost wrong to call them lakes. I mean, they're that big and that glamorous and that glorious. I mean, we're going to be, my buddy Brandon and I are going up to northern Lake Superior here in about 6 weeks. It's it's in the same state that we live in, but it's a 16-hour drive via high-speed expressway to not like 16 hours on a two-track road going 2 miles an hour. I mean, like doing 80 miles an hour, and it's a 16-hour drive to get to where we're going. I mean, these are huge lakes with 1,000-foot freighters on them. I mean, they're enormous. And so you talk to most people around the world, they have a really hard time even conceptualizing the size of the Great Lakes and the clarity and the beauty and the blue water, and there's none of that yucky, salty yuck in it. It's just all freshwater perfection. It's awesome up here. Only problem is it's cold.
What are average temperatures?
40 degrees Fahrenheit.
That is cold. I don't know if I've been in 40-degree water.
Yeah, if you're in 100 feet of water in the Great Lakes, it doesn't matter what time of year you go. It's going to be 40 degrees in the warm spot. I mean, if you're like in the middle of the summer, if you're on some of the shallower shipwrecks, it may be in the 60s Fahrenheit. The water in the real shallow parts of the water where you're doing, the your safety stop, if you're doing a little shallow wreck, or even the late part of your decompression, the water might hit the 70s, but if you're in 100 feet of water, it's 40 degrees. Just, there's no way around it.
Oh, Lord. Yeah, that's, I don't know if well, I'm positive I've never been in anything that cold. And to be honest, so the first time I ever went diving was it was a Discover scuba dive. I was backpacking through Thailand, one of those typical stories. And then I went back to Austin, Texas, and come to find out that there's a pretty thriving local dive scene there. And so most of my courses that I've taken have been in Lake Travis. Well, I know you've been there. I don't know how often, but I know you've been there.
Yeah, I was there teaching a class last year. It was my first time in Lake Travis. My second time to Austin, but first time in Lake Travis.
Yeah, and so the visibility can get pretty bad there, and to be honest, I at times miss it a lot, even being out here, because here, most of the time, like I said, we're hopping on a flight and going somewhere blue and tropical. But I do miss it, and I came up in that type of diving, and it really does add a different skill set. I want to say, just kind of what you were speaking about, and teaching in that environment. I would always tell people, like, if you could get comfortable in this water, anywhere you go in the world, you're gonna love it. And obviously there's not anywhere. I mean, and I think the coldest I've ever been in the middle of winter. I think it was like down to 48, maybe 45 degrees. Because I remember like, holy cow, this is freezing. So are you typically always diving in a dry suit?
For the love of God, yes, of course. For crying out loud. Wetsuits are for water skiing or diving south of Key West somewhere. It's yeah,
Uh,
pretty much everything I do is in a dry suit. I mean, the water's got to be above 80 for me to even think. Like I went down to goddamn Key Largo last year. I took my dry suit with me. I was down in off the east coast of Florida, off Pompano Beach, with some people. I took my dry suit because they said the water was going to be 77. I was like, forget that, dude. I'm just taking my dry suit. And everybody laughed at me. Everybody made fun of me. But you know what? By the end of the 4 days, when everybody was shivering in their little 5 mils, I was like, dry suit doesn't seem like that bad idea, does it?
that's great, man. So outside diving, and correct me if I'm wrong, because I think I've just seen a picture. Do you play music?
I used to when I was younger. Yeah, yeah. I used to play in a couple bands.
What do you play, or what did you play? I should say.
I played like rhythm guitar and harmonica and sang backup singing, all of which I did poorly, but
So it's not a hobby you take up anymore, just kind of a thing of the past.
nowadays it's I've got an acoustic guitar in my little office here, and I strum some songs from time to time. It's just I've went more fully into just doing what I know I'm good at, and that's putting a regulator in my mouth.
Okay, awesome, man, awesome. So you said that you're about to take a trip in 6 weeks. What's going on there? Anything you can talk about, or?
Yeah, well, it's mid June here, early coming on mid June here in the Great Lakes, which for us it's the Great Lakes shipwreck season is underway. It was a late start. We had a long, weird winter this year, but the Great Lakes season is full swing. I'm heading up to the Straits of Mackinac, which is this little strait of water that connects two of the Great Lakes into this beautiful area between the northern lower peninsula and the upper peninsula of Michigan, Lake Michigan and Lake Huron, and it's a beautiful area with shipwrecks, awesome old wooden schooners from the 1800s and steel freighters from the mid 1900s, just a collection of amazing stuff and beautiful clear water. So we're going to be there, and then there's a little island up in northwestern Lake Superior, Isle Royal. We're going to be up there. That's what I thought was like a bucket list trip that I might never be able to do because it's just nearly impossible to get on that boat up there. It's sold out years in advance, and some space opened up on a guy that had a trip and got a hold of us. So we realized we better jump on it now, or we may never do it. Kind of a trip. So that's coming up, and then a bunch of other little Great Lakes trips will be popping up through the season here. So we're here in the Great Lakes. Late May, if the weather's good, the season starts, and it's usually wrapped up by October. Generally, the first boat that gets blown out in October, they just wrap it up for the year. So sometimes it stretches a week or two into October, but generally it's a June, July, August, September thing for the charter boats in the Great Lakes area.
No, that's exciting, and hopefully I can see some pictures from that trip. So no, that's awesome. So if I was heading to the Great Lakes and I had the ability to be able to go and hit up some of these shipwrecks, is there definite ones that you would point, like that's the one you got to go see? I know there's a lot. I mean, I want to say there's probably the most shipwrecks. I don't know about the most, but I don't know the numbers, but I know there's a lot.
Yeah, I mean, like you're talking like to dive, it's crazy. Like I was saying a minute ago about how big and how vast the Great Lakes area is, for people from around the world that don't understand it. It's not like your local like backyard, lake. Because when I say the Great Lakes, I mean we're talking Michigan, of course, the Great Lakes state, but you've got Illinois and Wisconsin and Montana and Indiana and Ohio, New York and Pennsylvania and all of Ontario. I mean, it's a huge area to try to cover. I mean, it's an extremely vast area. So if there's one spot, I'll tell you, 100% first top of my list is Alpena, Michigan. It's the For the longest time it was the only freshwater national marine sanctuary that NOAA had. They're opening up one in Wisconsin, I believe, but the Thunder Bay National Marine Sanctuary was the only freshwater sanctuary in the world, for the U.S. and then territories throughout the world. But you're talking like Shipwreck Alley, and it's amazing. I mean, there's wrecks. One of my absolute favorite shipwrecks to dive is literally in 20 feet of water. I mean, it's a beautiful old wreck. It's on this real rocky area. One of the absolute prettiest props you will see ever on a shipwreck. Just big and beautiful, and boilers, and you can snorkel it or you can dive it. So it's something anybody can do. All the way to, there's wrecks right there in the 150, 200 foot range and beyond that are full technical dives that again, I mean, they look like old sailing ships right out of, Pirates of the Caribbean, bowsprints and masts still standing. They look like you could bring them to the surface and put new sails on them and, head for Chicago kind of a thing.
Awesome, awesome. Yeah, no, I've definitely, I like I said, I have not been to the Great Lakes, so I'm trying to think, comprehend on like the massive scale of it. Obviously, like I've heard stories, and you're here telling me, but it's definitely a destination that I've had in the back of my mind. There's certain places where I'm like, oh, I would love to go over there and get some diving in. Obviously, I would need to prep quite a bit. I do have a dry suit, and I've done slightly cold water diving, but definitely nothing compared to the Great Lakes. So I also saw that I saw that you enjoy cave diving. Would you say that you're more of a wreck diver than a cave diver? Is it equally the same, or if you had a free weekend and you're like, oh, I could go one or the other, which one do you think you would go to?
Well, I would say I'm definitely a wreck diver more than a cave diver. I'm full cave trained, but I'm still a baby cave diver. I am like to cave diving what most people that have sea cards, somewhere in their wallet are to scuba diving. I just don't get to do it enough. I wish I did. I go down when we do a little trip. I get down there for a long weekend or a week, and it's the same as my wife who doesn't dive that often, but we go down on vacation. It's a couple days of getting back in the groove. You know, 2 days, 3 days in, you're like, oh yeah, this is great, loving it again. Then you're really at a high, and then you're packing it all up before you know it, and you're going home, and it's months, if not a year, before you're doing it again. Unfortunately, interesting enough, so I've been, teaching ice diving for a decade or more, and we came to the realization years ago that on Friday night when we're leaving the dive shop to get everything ready for going ice diving just at the local lake Saturday morning. By the time you get up, drive out to the lake, get all the gear you need to set up the ice dive, to cut the hole, to set up the tents and get everything ready. by the time you actually jump in the water, we mapped it out one day, and we realized that, if we would have, when we left the dive shop, if we would have just jumped on Interstate 75 and headed south to Florida, we would be jumping in the water in the Florida caves at the exact same time. Like we would be getting into, Peacock Springs at the same time that we're jumping into 34-degree after cutting a hole in the ice water.
Oh man.
So as I age, yeah, I prefer to go to the warmth of the Florida springs than the local water. But this is my home. I'm a Michigan boy. I don't think that's ever going to change. We have a beautiful state, beautiful water. I'm a big proponent of I'm on the board for Great Lakes Great Responsibility. If I can give those guys a plug. We're on the mission of removing 1 million pieces of trash from the Great Lakes area basin, and we're well on our way there. So this is home. So as much as I like that warm Florida cave diving water, this is what I do.
That's awesome. No, that's great. And yeah, well, definitely. I'll have to. I don't know if I've obviously never been ice diving, but I don't know if I would want to be honest. But one day I'll have to get and try it and see what it's all about.
Well, if you do, let me tell you something. It's the stupidest diving you can ever do in the world. It really is. However, I have to throw a caveat in there. I came across this shipwreck that's up in northern Michigan. That's in this lake that's connected to Lake Michigan. And there's this beautiful 200-foot amazing shipwreck called the Kuka that we started doing these ice dives on, years ago. And it is like a unicorn of ice dives, because you're under the ice, you have the beauty of the ice, you have 50, 60, 80, maybe 100 feet of visibility depending on the year. I mean, it's amazing. On a dive that's maybe got 20 foot of visibility on a good day in the summertime. It's in 40 feet of water, but it's a 200 foot, 30 foot beam, real goddamn shipwreck that's in this little lake that they brought in for shelter one time, and then it was turned into a speakeasy little floating thing back in Prohibition era, and then it sank, and so it's sitting in this lake. It is the most glamorous ice dive in the world, in my opinion. So if there's a place to do it, that's the place to do it. And it really brought back the love of ice diving for me, is because it brings together everything. It's your ice diving, but your shipwreck diving. It's awesome.
That sounds awesome. I'll have to maybe book a course with you at some point in time. So my last couple of questions for you before I let you go. So as a person that's been in the podcast game with a very successful podcast, what advice could you give to a small but up-and-coming scuba podcast?
Start recording. Put it out there. Don't be nervous. Just do it. Just do it. Get your voice out there. Get your personality out there. Even if you think you know what you're doing, it's going to change and it's going to evolve anyways as you go. So don't let fear of sounding silly, and don't let fear of not, doing it the right way or broadcasting the wrong way, or just get out there and do it. It's fun. You're going to learn on the fly, and you're going to learn about yourself. So don't hesitate.
Okay, awesome. And I don't know if the last question, if the advice will be the same, but you are at the pub and you are having a conversation with the 21-year-old James Mott. What advice would you give to that person?
Get an education that's going to make you money, and don't scuba dive for the rest of your life. Scuba dive for fun, not for a living. It's that's not true. That's not true. I mean, it's funny, I often say to people that, I'm trying my hardest not to ever have to get a real job, is why I'm still in scuba. It's a two-edged sword. I mean, I love this industry, but we're just a small little industry, and I was stupid enough to find this little tiny niche of DIR, thinking that I wanted to do something that meant something to me, when I looked in the mirror every night, and that's like a tiny, tiny piece of an already tiny puzzle. But you know what? I've made it work for 30 years, so I guess I'm not doing that bad. It's awesome. I haven't had to put on a stupid nerdy tie, every single day to go to a cubicle, and I hate it. So I can't complain too much.
No, that's amazing, and that's a great way to end it, man. Thank you very much for coming on to the show today, James. I really appreciate it.
Nick, I appreciate it, bud. It's been fun, and I wish you the best with this new podcast, man. I'm looking forward to hear how off gassing goes. I think it's a great little shtick. I think, talking to people like this, it's awesome. So good luck to you.
Off Gassing, a Scuba podcast.